This happened to me a few years back, when I was in my early 20s. At the time, I worked in a department store at a makeup counter. The job relies heavily on good customer service and building relationships because you want people to keep coming back to spend money on your products. We're given personalized business cards so that we can build our own client base. Very important for a commission department. It's not uncommon to be familiar with people who frequently shop in the store. As workers, our training is focused on being friendly and accommodating. One day, while I was working, I had to move to a makeup counter that wasn't my own to cover someone's lunch break. It was a really slow day, so I was just leaning on the counter, people watching. I could tell most shoppers were just browsing, so I kept to myself. One of the people that I noticed was a very tall and broad man. He walked very slowly, almost hunched over. His face was fixed very aggressively, like he was angry but focused. He circled around the counter a few times, but I could feel his gaze resting on me instead of the products. After a few rotations around the department, I decided to greet him in case he needed some help. It wasn't until he came directly over to me that I realized just how big the man actually was. I'm a 4'10", 140-pound female, so I always feel pretty small regardless. But even with this man's slouched posture, he was well over 6 feet tall, and well over twice my weight. I'll never forget his teeth. They were completely black in the front. Your eyes couldn't help but go right to them. Despite this menacing appearance, he was quite soft-spoken. Truthfully, I could tell he wasn't all there by the way he talked. He told me no when I asked if he needed help, but he requested my number. So direct. We had never even spoken before. I declined and said that I was in a relationship and that it would be inappropriate. He then asked if he could have a business card for the counter, in case he wanted to get some products later. Since I wasn't on my normal counter and I really wanted him to just go away, I handed him my coworker's business card and told him to call if he had any questions. It worked, and he walked away right after that, filling me with a bit of relief. Only a couple of minutes later, though, the phone on the counter starts to ring. I answered with my peppy customer service voice and say, "Thank you for calling. How can I help you?" Immediately, I know it's the same guy when he starts talking. He asked me again for my personal number, and I explain once again that I cannot do that. He just wants to talk, he explains. Since he wasn't getting the hint, I say, "I should have told you that I'm married. You can't have my number." Politely, he apologizes and then hangs up. I thought that would be the end of him, but for the next few weeks or so, I spent much of my time at work anxious that he would show up. I would see him every week, and he would lurk around the counter just looking for me. Anytime I would see him, I'd immediately drop what I was doing to run and hide or run to the closest customer and offer any bit of assistance to make it look like I was busy so he couldn't talk to me. I successfully managed to dodge him every time, and it came to the point where I stopped seeing him finally. I was thrilled. I had almost completely forgotten about him, until one day I decided to go to Walmart by myself to pick up a few things on my day off. I generally like to shop alone. I can take all the time I need, and I like leisurely looking around. I grabbed a basket and made my way over to the cosmetic and wellness section, since that's where most of the things I needed were. I only managed to grab a few things before I locked eyes with him as I walked by the supplement aisle. I had recently changed my hair color and wasn't wearing my work uniform, so I didn't think he'd realize who I was. I was ready to just go about my shopping and ignore him, until I noticed that he'd dropped all the items he'd had in his hands and started running my way. I panicked and swiftened my pace immediately. I thought to myself, he's not really going to follow you through the whole store, right? But as I turned around to look, I could see his humongous body just plowing through people, with that same terrifying look on his face, only a bit meaner. His black teeth growing closer with a snarl. Since the direction I was walking was the opposite of the exit, there was no way in hell I was going to turn around. I decided that my best course of action would be to follow the perimeter of the store and cut down the center section, which would bring me close to the registers. I speed-walked the entire time, in hopes of losing him amongst all the people, but never once turning around again. By the time I'd made it to the register area, I could actually feel his presence behind me. Still not wanting to turn around to look, I glanced in the reflection of the soda machines that were in between us and the register aisles, just to see how close he was. To my horror, there were only about 1.5 to 2 feet between us. I was afraid to just drop my things and run out the door, in case he decided to follow me to my car. I had parked in the far back of the parking lot, and I didn't want to risk it. I also didn't want to get in line at the registers, since the lines were long and I would just be standing out in the open alone. Instead, I walked into the cluster of people crowded around the self-checkout line. I noticed another large but older gentleman with his carriage in the middle, and ran straight for him. The people were so closely clustered together that the man following me couldn't make it through. I ran over to the man in the line, grabbed onto his carriage and said, "I'm so sorry. I'm not cutting in front of you, but there's a man that's been following me through half the store, and I'd like to stand with you." He was so sweet, and let me be with him while we waited in line. He even let me go ahead of him so I could leave quicker. As I was cashing out, I could see in my peripheral vision my stalker staring at me and pacing about, but he couldn't come near me since the self-checkout is somewhat sectioned off. By the time I had finished and grabbed my receipt, I couldn't see him anywhere anymore. I looked around, but he was nowhere to be found. I thought about asking the older man to walk me to my car, but he still hadn't finished at his register, so I decided to call my boyfriend and make a run for it. Staying on the phone, I explained to him what was going on as I sprinted to my car in tears, frantically looking around in case he tried to follow me outside. I made it to my car safely and rushed right home, breaking down to my parents about what had just happened. I could feel it in my bones that that man wanted to do something to me, and thankfully I didn't find out what that was. His aggressive aura was palpable. To this day, I can still remember the adrenaline, nervousness, and the sheer terror I felt when he followed me. I've never felt so vulnerable and helpless, even with all of those people around. I quit that job roughly 2 years later. I had only seen him one other time there since the incident, but I live in constant fear that we'll cross paths again someday. I'm afraid to shop alone, something that I wouldn't give a second thought to years before. So I'm not sure I know where to start with this one, as it happened 10 years ago, and the trauma makes the memory fuzzy. But I'll try my best to be precise and accurate in my telling of this. For some context, I'm a short, almost 5-foot female, who's a bit on the fluffy side. Bob is incredibly tall, probably the tallest person I've ever met, with huge gauged ears, and can, when angry, look quite intimidating. He's never hurt anyone, though. The kind of guy that nurses birds back to health. You get my drift. I grew up in a small town, big enough to have a Walmart at the time, but small enough that you knew everyone, and everyone knew you. In high school, one of my best friends dated this guy we'll call Adam. He was a grade higher than us, and generally popular. At the time, I didn't think much about him, other than that he was my friend's boyfriend. He was likable to almost everyone, charismatic and seemingly intelligent. There were things at the time, in hindsight, I should have seen, but I was blinded by youth and ignorance. Fast forward a little bit. I'm 17, graduated early and off to college. I'm a minor in a new town, over 2 hours from home, knowing nobody and living in the college dorms. It was co-ed, and a few people I knew from my hometown, but they were all older than me since I was going to college early, and I didn't have a strong relationship with any of them. My first day, I come to the dorm and see that Adam is the male RA for my floor. Yes, I think to myself, I'm so glad I know someone here. We chat for a while as I unpack my stuff. My parents and I look around the campus, and they drop me off, giving lots of hugs and waving goodbye. I'm excited and terrified to lead my new adventure of independence. When I get back to my dorm, on my door is a piece of paper that reads something along the lines of, "Due to improper moral conduct, you have been expelled from college and should leave immediately," or something to that effect. I open the door and see all of my belongings are gone. I ran down the stairs and showed the paper to the front desk in tears, and they helped me figure it out. Lo and behold, Adam the RA had pulled a prank and moved all my things, underwear and fiddly bits included, into his room. I was furious, when in retrospect I should have been terrified, but I laughed it off and unpacked my stuff again. It was my first day. I was young. I didn't understand that I should have nipped it in the bud right then and there, but it's where this story really begins. Adam didn't get into any trouble from that instance, but over the next year he would occasionally play pranks on me and the other residents that were above the threshold for appropriate. At the time I was beginning to think he was weird, but nothing besides that first time was so overt that I couldn't write them off as the actions of the young and dumb. Fast forward 2 years. My boyfriend at the time, future husband, who we'll call Bob, and I had been living off campus in these super crowded apartments. There was at one time 7 people in a 3-bedroom apartment. We decided when our lease was up we would move into a larger place and sublet. We found a nice apartment across town that had 4 bedrooms, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. There were 2 bathrooms, 1 upstairs and 1 downstairs, that were in the middle between the 2 bedrooms. Each bathroom had a door leading to each bedroom, and the downstairs bathroom had a 3rd door leading into the living area. We signed the lease in our name only, and got permission to sublease under our name. It meant, though, that we were personally responsible for any damage, and the full rent amount, as the lease was in our name. Here's where we made our first mistake. Adam and his then-wife had been recently kicked out of their apartment. Being the nice, generous people we were, we offered to sublease to them month to month. They both had steady jobs and Pell Grants, so I knew they could afford the rent, and Adam was in ROTC. He seemed to be on the straight and narrow. We also put out feelers to other friends and found another hometown guy to rent one of the other rooms, but he couldn't move in for another 90 days, which at the time was fine. As we were moving into the new place, Adam and his wife offered to help, and we discovered that a lot of our stuff has gone missing or broken. We're pissed, but there's nothing to be done about it, and we didn't know for sure who did it. The second all our stuff is over to the new place, I've discovered Adam and his wife had filled the entire house with their stuff. Sofas, kitchen utensils. Fine, I don't mind sharing space, I think, and let it go. I worked during the day and went to school and slept during the night. Adam and his wife went to school early in the morning, slept during the day, and worked overnight shifts as security guards. I started noticing some very expensive electronics coming through the house. I rarely saw Adam and his wife, but on occasion I would ask, "Hey, how much was that brand new projector?" And Adam's response was, "Covered by the worksite's insurance." It made me uncomfortable, but again, he was a prankster, so maybe he was just kidding. His family was very wealthy. Maybe they were just presents, right? About a month passes, and things are starting to get a bit weird. Each room had a separate deadbolt to it, so you could keep your room locked with the key only you had. I asked Adam and his wife not to get into my room, thinking back to the dorm days. I came home a number of times during the day to find things moved around. I thought it was my imagination at first, or Bob, but he vehemently denied moving anything. I started to test a theory by telling Bob I was going to place X on the nightstand, Y on the dresser, and Z on the windowsill, and not to touch them. I would come home to all of them being in different places. I thought I was going crazy. My room was deadbolted, so I started to try to figure out what was going on, when I noticed that the handle to the bathroom door that faced the living room had been flipped around, so it couldn't be locked from the inside. Weird, I thought to myself, but maybe it had always been that day. So, being the handy person I am, I grab my screwdriver and flip it back around. Problem solved. I left a little note on the kitchen counter, saying something along the lines of, "Hey man, I fixed the downstairs bathroom. I'm going to keep it locked for my privacy. Let's have a house meeting soon. Let me know when you're available and we'll talk about it." I wanted to ask him if he had been getting into my room and set some boundaries. The next day the note was gone, but no response. I left for my daily activities to come back and find my room had been thrashed. My small rodent pet had been taken outside, onto the patio in its cage with the door open. I'm livid. I checked my door, still deadbolted. I checked the bathroom door, it's still locked. But I find Adam had removed the door to the bathroom going into the empty downstairs bedroom, allowing him access to my room via the spare. What the hell? I leave another note on the counter, this time explaining, "Look, we need to talk. Whatever this is not cool." At this point in time, they were never home when I was. He had been fired from his night watch job, due to things going missing, I'd assume, and gone full force into his ROTC training. I don't know where the both of them were most of the time. I was working 40 hours a week and taking 30 credits and doing undergraduate research, so I was barely home. Bob was working 2 jobs and having to scooter across town, and then would come and see me after school on campus, so he was also rarely there. We found out later that Adam had been kicked out of college due to his behavior. Time passed and still no contact. I knew they were living there as stuff was moved around, but I never saw either of them. I stayed in my room for much of that period of time, as I thought maybe I was going crazy. My brain kept telling me that I was being unreasonable. Maybe there was a reason. Then one day Bob and I come home, and the door to my bathroom that faces the living room was gone. Just gone. This meant that to pee you had to do it in the open, with the whole kitchen and living room being able to see you, and all of the stuff in my room was trashed. My pets were outside again. My boyfriend's scooter was outside. Clothes were strewn about and stuff was missing. That was the last straw. I leave a note explaining, "This isn't cool," and put the door back on. I had received a note the next day saying they removed the door because it's unfair we have to walk upstairs to use the bathroom if we're in the living room, and you kept locking the door. But the door was not replaced. I called up the apartment complex and explained what was going on, and asked if we could break the lease in the next month and transfer it to a studio apartment. They agreed and a plan was set. After talking to the apartment for a while, we found out that Adam and his wife had been trespassed from the property prior to moving in, and failed to mention it to us. So again, I left a note on the kitchen counter, in not so nice of a tone this time. "Hey, the lease is in my name. You're here by my grace alone, on a month-to-month sublet. I was trying to be cool, but this is too much. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. I'm ending your sublease due to invading my privacy on multiple occasions and destroying apartment property." At this point in time, I had given my pets a good home, as I feared for their health due to the current situation. I made it a point for Bob and I to be away from the apartment for 2 days, to give everyone time to calm down. I get home and the note is gone. nothing in its place. I go to my room and Bob and I settle in. Tomorrow we start packing the non-essentials so we can move at the end of the month. At 5:30 a.m., I hear a knock on the door. Who is it? It's Adam. I go and unlock the door thinking he's come to talk to me about the eviction notice, and crack open the door. There, right in my tiny little face, is a gun. I can see straight down the barrel to Adam's calm, expressionless face. I scream and slam the door closed, twisting the deadbolt shut just in time. Bob is awake now, and he's running to the bathroom door and making sure it's locked. Adam starts slamming his body against the door and screaming about how he's going to kill me. This goes on for maybe 15 minutes. I'm amazed that the door held up, to be honest. Suddenly it goes quiet. Too quiet. I listen to see if I can hear what's going on outside. As soon as I can run across the room and grab my old faithful Nokia phone, I call 911 and explain the situation. The operator states, "There's a patrol car already on its way." That's weird, I think, but Bob and I huddle in the closet and wait. A knock comes at the door a few minutes later. I try to get out, but the sheer force of Adam's rage against my door has bent the deadbolt and made it hard to open, so Adam gets to the front door first. Him and his wife are talking to the officer by the time I get out of my room. They were well dressed and calm looking. I'm in my PJs and sweating, tears running down my face, and Bob was also disheveled. They were explaining to the police how they came to talk to us about an unfair 30-day eviction notice when we freaked out and began threatening them with violence. I try to butt in and explain my side of the story. A second officer arrives and pulls him outside to talk. I can hear that he goes on to explain that as the honorable ROTC soldier/police officer and his wife, who miraculously was now somehow pregnant, he was frightened for their lives when I started to threaten violence and worried about the health of their baby. I realized in that moment so many life lessons. Be the first to call the police. Make sure you know your optics. Learn the signs of a sociopath. And most importantly, don't have roommates. I tried to explain the situation to the officer. Told him about the gun. Showed him the deadbolt. But again, being young, dumb, and terrified, I didn't have any pictures of the mess they had made in my room, or the door they had removed, or any of the other weird things. I told the officer about how they had been trespassed off the property, how they weren't technically on the lease, how I suspected him of stealing from his work, but it all came out as a sleep-deprived, adrenaline-high ramble. Adam calmly handed a copy of his sublease and eviction notice to the officer, who proceeded to thank Adam for his service. I knew I was done for. The police informed Bob and I that we had to allow Adam and his wife the full 30 days, that we were not to talk to them or interact with them in any way during that 30 days, or Adam could call back and Bob and I would be arrested for continued harassment. For the rest of that month, Bob and I stayed in our room, only beelining for the door to go to work and come back. Every time we tried to leave to go into the kitchen or living room, there would be Adam telling us to get back into our room or he'd call the cops. If we had any money whatsoever, I would have rented a hotel room, but with the fees for breaking the lease plus college money, we were broke. For 30 days, he and his wife held us in proverbial hostage in our rooms. Finally, the night before the last day, I put out a note asking him to leave his keys so I can return them to the office. Guess what? He called the police. This time I make sure to control the optics. I'm dressed in the most innocent way possible, and try to explain how for 30 days I've been prevented from leaving my room, terrified of this man with a gun, and how I didn't want to break what the officer had asked of me last time by leaving the note. I also had a letter now from the apartment complex, stating they were trespassed. The officer took his keys and gave them to me. They finally move out. As I'm doing a final walkthrough, when I find he has overflowed the upstairs bathroom with water and put a hairdryer in the sink. He rigged it to turn on when I opened the door. Joke's on them though, as there was a GRE switch they plugged into it, and countless sex toys were strewn about the place. Bob and I move into our studio, but for years afterwards we would find ourselves somewhere and notice Adam behind us, following us wherever we went. The gaslighting had been so bad that it took a long time to realize we weren't crazy. I had nightmares of that month of hiding, of him shoving the gun in my face, of being somewhere and him turning up. The sheer sight of him made me nauseous and vomit on more than one occasion. After college, Bob and I moved back home. We were living our lives, the event far behind us. One day, I buy a newspaper to see the front page reads, "Local hometown hero Adam to have parade in his honor," and an account of how he had injured his leg while serving. Yup, there was a parade. I did do some research, though, and found out that he had joined up after college and only served 2 years. Never even made it overseas before he blew up his own leg while messing around, so I guess there is some karma in this world. To this day, in my hometown, he's considered an honored disabled veteran. I posted this story earlier today on Entitled Parents, and have had a few suggest I post it here as well. I hope you enjoy. So I have a friend who's just recently been getting into these entitled parents stories. We eventually started talking about them, and would laugh at the sheer stupidity of Darwin's failed experiments, until last week. She began to be more and more quiet, and when I finally pressed her, she revealed that she's been coming across some of the stories of attempted kidnapping, and they reminded her of a night many years ago. She never made a Reddit account, so she asked me if I could post her story. After telling me what happened, we're both still not sure if this fits or not, but it's a story that if someone would ever find themselves in a similar situation, they might get some ideas to protect themselves, maybe. So without further ado, many moons ago, in the early 2000s, my friend Sarah was going to the local state college. Now, while the college was in the city, she lived out in the country with her father, and would use the bus system to go to and from school. One afternoon, after class, her and her friends went to one of their apartments to study for some exams. Well, being the young and responsible young adults that they were, they studied for maybe 10 minutes before things turned to a more festive gathering. After a few hours, Sarah happened to glance at the clock, which caused her mind to snap. What time does the last bus run? Screaming profanities and prayers for warding off her demise by her father, she quickly ran to the bus stop just in time to catch its final trip of the night. With a huge sigh of relief, she flopped down into a seat in the back and threw her headphones on. Lost in thoughts of what elaborate tales to tell her father, she hadn't noticed a little boy walking up to her, until she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye as he sat down right beside her. She somehow managed to not recoil at the sight of the child, because while the child was completely filthy and reminded her of someone from Deliverance, it was his creepy smile that she remembered the most. He just sat there smiling at her, until she slowly slid her headphones down, and the following interaction began. "Hello? Hello. You're pretty. Well, thank you. What's your name?" Now, Sarah had this policy of never giving any personal info to strangers, but kids were pretty harmless in her opinion. Every alarm was going off in her head, though. "Katie. That's a nice name." Then the kid just sat there, smiling at her. After a few minutes of smiling, the kid finally said, "You would make a great mom." He hopped down and walked back to an even more dirty and unkempt monster of a man, who she could only assume was the boy's father. Just like his son, he was smiling at her. When she looked at him, he nodded politely and kept smiling. She put her headphones back on and dug out a book to pretend to study, but she kept looking back and noticed both of them smiling and staring right at her. As each stop came and went, she prayed they would get off the bus, but as the bus began to empty of other passengers, she soon found it was just her, some middle-aged woman, and those two. The bus was beginning to slow for its next stop in a small town, that had a series of restaurants. She couldn't take them anymore, and decided that it was safer for her to go to the McDonald's and wait for her father than to sit on that bus any longer. She gathered her things and prepared to disembark. As she allowed the woman to pass, she noticed the men gathering their things. Oh hell no, she thought, but she didn't want to make it out like she was trying to avoid them, so she moved to the seat near the front and sat back down. To her horror, she watched as the man and his son took another seat and sat back down, still smiling at her and nodding. Her anxiety was going through the roof at this point, as she'd watched more stops come and go until her stop was coming up. What was she going to do? Her mind raced. As the bus came to her stop, she gathered her things again and watched in horror as the men gathered theirs. Instead of getting off, she sat back down behind the driver. How much further until the end of the line? 3 more stops. Sarah leaned in and told the driver about the man and his son, and asked if it was possible to have the police there when they arrived. The driver looked into the mirror and told her he'd take care of it. Sarah glanced back, and her heart jumped into her throat, as while the little boy was still smiling at her, the father wasn't. She described it as the look a parent gives their child when they've done something wrong, and wait until we get home. Sarah was usually a very strong individual, but she was in tears as she took out her phone and tried to call her father. It went immediately to voicemail. Who else could she call? She finally decided to call her ex. He may have been disloyal, but she could always rely on him when it counted the most. Quietly as she could, she poured her heart out about what was happening and asked if he could meet them at the last stop. Finally, they came over the hill to where the final stop was. Frantically, she looked for something, anything that could help her, but there was nothing. Finally, the bus pulled in and the doors swung open. The man glared down at her, waiting for her to get off first. "Hold up, miss. I need to talk to you about your bus pass." The man stood there for a moment until the driver told him this was the last stop, and he needed to get off. "I'm waiting for my—" "Sir, you need to get off. If you're waiting for her, she'll be along shortly, but you need to get off right now." Angrily, the man stomped off with his child in tow. As soon as they got off, the driver shut the door. The man began yelling and banging on the door, and Sarah was scared he was going to break the glass, until she noticed 2 police cars pulling in, followed shortly by the piece of crap Jack drove. The police ordered the man away, and she couldn't hear what was being said. Jack later revealed that the man was claiming that Sarah was his daughter, and he was taking her home. Once Jack asked him for her name, he said Katie, and that was all she wrote. In the end, the man got into a fight with Jack and the officers, but was finally arrested. When she got home and told her father what happened, he tossed her the keys to his old '82 Ram, and she never rode the bus again. It was loud and a pain to drive, but she never felt safer. She did ride the bus one final time after that, to deliver a plate of cookies to the driver who saved her life. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I have a little bit of an update here for you guys. I've recently started streaming a little bit on Twitch. I don't know if you guys are interested in just hanging out and seeing a bit of gameplay of maybe Monster Hunter or some games like that, maybe a few horror games, but I'll leave a link to my Twitch in the description of the video below. As always, if you guys like the video, please leave a comment or perhaps like or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you'd like to message me, or you'd like to send in a story for me to read, or you have a suggestion for a story I should read, the links to all of my social media will be in the description of the video below as well. This includes my Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, and now, of course, my Twitch account. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. But please guys, be patient, because I do get a lot of messages, so if I don't respond to you right away within like a week or two, Just be a little patient, I'll get to it as soon as I can. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the description of the email or message what the name of the story is, what the category of the story is, and how you would like to be credited in the video that the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the music used in this video, links to the music and the order in which the music appears will always be in the description below the video, so you can go ahead and check that out there. Last but not least, if you guys do enjoy my content, please take a look at my Patreon, and if you feel so inclined, maybe donate like $1 or something. Every little bit helps. It'll never be necessary, but of course, it's always an option if you guys would like to support the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.